Hey, Coach Hallis here, and I want to talk about student presentations. For a long time, I had just gotten away from having students do presentations. As I moved to more of a deeper learning style of teaching, I had students focus on other kinds of products that I thought were more authentic and more meaningful. Where I had seen students just give low quality presentations, they didn't seem to care about them much, and the impact of a presentation given to a classroom just wasn't very meaningful to students. So I'd kind of moved away from that until this year when I had to teach 10th grade English in Virginia. It's actually a required standard that students give a presentation. And so I got to thinking about how I could solve some of those issues. And I wanted to share something that I did this year where students had gave presentations as a final product for this particular project that we did. And I think some of the things that they did helped to solve some of my concerns about presentations and things we might think about when you're asked to have students teach them because or students use them, because there are valuable reasons for students to give presentations. It's more fun research than just writing a dry paper. The research skills that they do themselves are applicable outside of school, and there are some workplace skills with presentations, and not all students that are going to need to learn how to research are going to use that just for doing research papers, but whether it's workplace or even job interviews and things like that, where students should be able to present things in interesting and unique ways. So some of the things that we did, first, brief synopsis of this project that I had students do. We worked with what it meant to be a marginalized group, focusing on marginalized groups of students in particular. Students figured out what that was. We launched that by having them speak with our director of student services, who shared some very specific local statistics about how students from different marginalized groups were performing according to state and local metrics and that sort of thing. And I pushed them to kind of look more deeply into that. So in groups, they decided who wanted to research which marginalized groups within our school and what we could do to improve things for those different groups. So in this example, these students decided to research Hispanic students at the school. And the big takeaways that I would push for if you're going to have students write presentations is to give them authentic presentations, or to make them be authentic presentations, meaning like what's the real reason for doing it. So the reason that these students were writing this was we were going to have a member of our school administration and that member of the central office, our director of student services, come back into the classroom at the end of the semester, and they were going to present proposals for what sort of things that our school could do, with an emphasis on the lowest effort for the highest impact. So what is the most reasonable, realistic changes that a school system can make that would get us the most benefit for helping marginalized groups? Because you can have really big pie in the sky ideas, or things that might be very costly that would be helpful, but I wanted them to be challenged to think about what are the things that we could really get off the ground, what are the things that wouldn't cost us a lot of time, money, or effort, but would have a big impact on these kids. So knowing that they were going to have that authentic audience was also important. So you got to be doing it for something that you care about, like helping people in a real tangible way, not just something that you're saying or putting on a PowerPoint. You have to have an authentic audience, meaning not just the kids in the class and the teacher. And you need to give opportunities for multiple drafts, which is something that I think really was a lot of the problem with when I was doing more traditional teaching, and a lot of the traditional teaching styles that I see is a presentation given to the class is the final product. Whereas the way that I did this, that was more of a first draft. So we had students, ultimately they gave this presentation publicly 3 times, once to the class as a first draft. Then we had a couple of weeks to keep working on it after they got feedback from their peers and from their teacher. Then they did it again as a second draft so we could celebrate some of their growth, but still see some of the rough edges they needed to smooth out. And then their final presentation was to the authentic audience, the director of student services and a school administrator. So we could really build up some skills and reflect on things that we weren't doing well. So this group had Hispanic students, and I really wanted to focus on one part. They gave just a little bit of fun with transitions, some things. But they gave some statistics, and they broke these sort of things down. They talked about them in this presentation. I just clicked on a link that I didn't mean to. They learned how to put links in presentations, and that's this sort of thing that they things that you obviously teach kids when you're presenting. But something interesting happened by giving them these multiple drafts and these opportunities to look at what presenting can be multiple times. So the students this group included a young man from Honduras who spoke very little English. He described it as only really understanding about 5% of English that was spoken to him. And he didn't have a lot of confidence, but it is a presentation, and we wanted all the students to be involved in participating. And when we first, and I try to leave most of that up to the students as to how and what levels they were going to do that. And at first, they were going to have the student just memorize the slides, basically, and we were trying to get him to, practice his English by, these are the slides that I'm going to say in English, and this is going to be my contribution. And you don't need to do as many as the other students, we understand, but they wanted him to read a slide in English. And so in the first draft, if you will, the first time presenting it, the slide that you see here was in English, and he did his best that he could, but it was very embarrassing and nerve-wracking for him, and he tried, and of course we encouraged him, but we then had this idea, like the whole point of this slide, this is what it looks like in English, was to give some empathy for what it feels like, what these students are going through who don't speak English as a first language. So it made a lot of sense for him to be the one that read that slide out. But then in our between the first and second draft, it gave us time to kind of brainstorm that group to talk about how can we make that better. And as you can see, the result was we decided to turn these two slides instead to write them in his native language of Spanish. And so now he is presenting this slide in Spanish, and he's speaking in his fluent language, and he has more confidence and more ability. Now, the reason that worked out is because the whole point of the slide was to let the audience itself experience what a student is experiencing when a fluent English teacher is up there speaking in their fluent language, his or her fluent language, while the audience has very little understanding of what they're saying. So he goes up, and now between the first and second draft, we decided this is what he's going to do. He's now going to present in the language that he's confident in, and then they asked the presentation's audience, how did that make them feel? What did they get from that? And then we gave the presentation in English and talked about how, just having translations up here is one of the low impact or one of the low effort, high impact things that teachers can do. Is if you know that you have students that speak a different language in your class as a first language, you can throw those things into Google Translate and just at least have a translation along with your PowerPoints, your notes that you give. So in the final presentation, this is what our people got. They got him speaking in his fluent language, and they have no idea what he's saying. Then they get a translation, and the other group members get to help read this English part. And it's a really high impact for them getting the empathy piece, for the audience really understanding what their point was, and for that student having an opportunity to shine. I bring up that whole story because without going through multiple drafts of the presentation itself, there were many things like that where in all of the students' presentations where you catch things, or they notice things, or they realize the things that we used to be doing at the end. You would realize, I really should have planned for this presentation better. Or, I thought that I was going to be able to wing it and it was going to be fine. You realize those things, but when you have the time to go deep and do multiple drafts of these sort of things, those students have that at the start or early in the project, rather than this is the end and, I should have done better. I hope I'll do so next time. So I would encourage you to include those kinds of things the next time that you're going to have students do presentations in class.